this episode, we take a role that can sound intimidating and make it feel practical: the second-line mindset in AI risk governance. Many beginners hear second line and assume it means being the person who says no, slows everything down, and points out flaws without offering help. That stereotype is common, but it is not what effective second-line work looks like, especially when artificial intelligence, AI, is moving fast and teams feel pressure to deliver. A strong second line makes the organization safer by asking better questions, validating key claims, and improving how decisions are made, without turning governance into a bottleneck. The point is to create responsible momentum, where progress continues but exposure is managed. By the end, you should be able to explain what second-line work is, why it matters, and how to challenge and validate in a way that helps teams succeed. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A clear way to understand second-line thinking is to contrast it with building and operating. The first line is usually where products are built, models are used, and business goals are pursued, and that work naturally focuses on delivering value. The second line focuses on risk oversight, meaning it asks whether the value is being pursued in a way that is safe, defensible, and aligned with obligations and appetite. This is not about distrust, because healthy organizations assume teams are acting in good faith, but good faith does not prevent blind spots. Second-line work exists because complex systems produce unintended consequences, and those consequences often appear where builders are too close to the work to see clearly. The second line adds perspective, consistency, and discipline, so the organization does not rely on luck and heroic individuals. When done well, it feels like a seatbelt, not like a handbrake. The first skill in a second-line mindset is knowing what it means to challenge, because challenge can easily become unproductive. Productive challenge is specific, evidence-based, and tied to harm, rather than being vague skepticism or personal critique. Instead of saying this feels risky, a second-line reviewer should be able to say what risk is present, who could be impacted, and what conditions make it plausible. The challenge should also point toward a decision, such as whether to constrain scope, add a control, or delay until a key gap is addressed. When challenge lacks a decision anchor, it becomes an endless conversation and teams feel blocked. When challenge is anchored, it becomes a way to move faster because it prevents rework and public incidents later. This is why good second-line challenge is structured, not emotional, and it respects the reality that teams must ship. Validation is the second skill, and it is different from challenge even though the two often happen together. Validation means confirming that important claims about the system are true enough to support the intended use, especially in high-stakes contexts. If a team claims a model is accurate, validation asks accurate for what, for whom, and under what conditions. If a team claims the system is safe, validation asks what safety means here, what harms were tested, and what monitoring will detect drift or misuse. If a team claims sensitive data is protected, validation asks where the data flows, what boundaries exist, and what evidence shows those boundaries hold under real behavior. Validation is not a demand for perfection, because perfection is not achievable, but it is a demand for credibility. When second-line validation is strong, leaders can make decisions with confidence because they understand what is known, what is uncertain, and what controls are compensating. A major beginner misunderstanding is thinking the second line exists to catch mistakes after they happen, when the real value is preventing predictable harm earlier. The best second-line work happens before exposure grows, during intake, design decisions, and readiness review. Early involvement reduces blocking later because it catches mismatches between use case and control strength, while changes are still easy. For example, if a system is moving from internal drafting to customer-facing interaction, early second-line attention can trigger stronger review and monitoring before the feature is widely used. If a team plans to use AI outputs to influence a decision about a person, early second-line involvement can require clear boundaries, human oversight, and explainability expectations before any automation creep happens. When the second line shows up late, It often has to stop things abruptly, and that is when it earns the blocker reputation. Timing is not a detail. Timing is the difference between guidance and disruption. Another core part of the second-line mindset is understanding that the job is not to own the system, but to own the risk posture and the decision quality around the system. Second-line teams are usually not the engineers who can change the model directly, and that is fine. Their power is in shaping the rules and evidence that determine when a system is ready, what constraints are required, and how monitoring and incident readiness are established. This is why second-line work is deeply tied to governance, because governance is the place where decision rights, thresholds, and accountability are defined. If a second-line reviewer sees recurring weaknesses, the correct move is often to improve the program, such as updating control libraries, simplifying intake questions, or clarifying policy language, rather than lecturing each team one by one. The second line protects the organization by improving the system of decision-making, not just by reviewing individual projects. To challenge without blocking, the second line must be skilled at asking questions that narrow uncertainty instead of expanding it. A blocking question is one that opens a giant research project without clarifying what decision it changes. A helpful question is one that targets the decision point, such as which risk is highest, what the most likely harm is, and what control would reduce it quickly. If a team cannot explain where training data came from, the second line can ask for a limited, high-value inventory of sources rather than demanding a perfect catalog of everything. If monitoring is weak, the second line can ask what minimal signals would catch the most damaging failures and what thresholds would trigger action. This approach treats uncertainty like a set of choices that must be made with evidence, not like an excuse to freeze. In practice, second-line value comes from helping teams focus on what matters most. A second-line mindset also requires empathy for builders, not as a personal favor, but as a governance strategy. When teams feel attacked, they hide problems, and hidden problems are where risk grows. When teams feel supported, they share early warnings, ask for guidance sooner, and treat governance as part of successful delivery. Empathy does not mean lowering standards. It means explaining standards in terms of harm prevention and decision clarity. It also means recognizing real constraints like deadlines, limited staffing, and imperfect data, and then designing controls that fit reality. A second-line reviewer who only says no without offering a safe path creates shadow behavior, where teams route around oversight. A second-line reviewer who says here is how to make this safe enough to proceed creates alignment. That alignment is one of the strongest risk controls an organization can have. In high-performing programs, the second line uses proportionality as a guiding principle because friction must match stakes. Proportionality means low-risk experimentation should not face the same review burden as high-stakes decisioning or customer-facing communication. It also means that when stakes rise, the second line becomes more demanding about evidence, monitoring, and accountability because the cost of being wrong is higher and harder to reverse. This proportional approach prevents the common failure where governance is either too heavy and therefore ignored, or too light and therefore ineffective. Proportionality also helps the second line communicate clearly with leadership because it can explain why certain projects require additional controls without making it sound like arbitrary bureaucracy. For beginners, the key is to see proportionality as fairness in governance, where the rules are predictable and tied to impact rather than to politics. The second line also strengthens organizations by building a shared language for risk, because confusion about words leads to confusion about decisions. Terms like risk, control, monitoring, validation, and incident need consistent meanings, or teams will talk past each other. When a second-line reviewer asks for evidence, they should be clear about what counts as evidence, such as decision records, testing summaries, monitoring plans, or incident response pathways. When they ask for accountability, they should clarify who owns the decision, who owns the controls, and who reports back on effectiveness. This shared language reduces friction because teams know what is expected before the review begins. It also reduces the chance that a project passes review based on persuasive storytelling rather than on real safeguards. In that way, the second line is not just an auditor, it is an educator that shapes the organization's risk literacy. A practical way to see second-line contribution is to focus on how it improves the quality of trade-offs. Many AI decisions are not about eliminating risk, but about choosing the right constraints and controls so value can be delivered safely. The second line can help teams articulate trade-offs clearly, such as the trade-off between speed and exposure, or the trade-off between automation and human oversight. It can also help leaders understand which risks are reversible and which are not, which changes what should be prioritized. For example, a minor tone issue in internal drafting is usually reversible, while sensitive data leakage or unfair outcomes in decisioning can be hard to unwind. When second-line review highlights reversibility and consequence, teams can choose safer deployment patterns, like limited rollout, constrained scope, or required review for certain outputs. Those choices are how progress continues without gambling with high-impact harms. Second-line teams also play an important role in preventing automation creep, which is the gradual increase in how much the model influences decisions over time. A system might begin as optional decision support, then become a default recommendation, then become a gatekeeper that humans rarely override. This progression often happens quietly because it feels efficient, and nobody notices the risk shift until something goes wrong. The second line helps by requiring clear boundaries on model influence and by insisting that scope changes trigger reassessment. It also encourages monitoring of human behavior, such as override rates and reliance patterns, because risk is shaped by how people use outputs, not only by model performance. When automation creep is managed, organizations can still capture efficiency while retaining accountability and the ability to intervene. That is a core second-line contribution, keeping control aligned with reality as usage evolves. Another area where second-line thinking shines is incident readiness, because incidents test whether governance is real. The second line can help ensure that AI incidents are defined, that reporting pathways exist, and that the organization knows who can authorize containment actions quickly. It can also require that incident learning feeds back into program improvements, such as updating controls, improving monitoring signals, and clarifying policy guidance. Without that learning loop, the organization repeats the same mistakes, and each repeat damages trust and increases regulatory attention. Second-line teams can also help balance the need for quick response with the need for evidence preservation and clear communication, so containment actions do not accidentally destroy the information needed to understand root cause. For beginners, it helps to see incident readiness as an extension of validation, because you validate not only the model, but also the organization's ability to detect and respond when reality deviates from expectations. A second-line mindset is also about reducing the cost of doing the right thing, because that is how governance becomes sustainable. If every review requires long meetings and dense paperwork, teams will dread engagement, and oversight will be seen as a tax. Second-line leaders can lower friction by standardizing templates, creating reusable control patterns, and making expectations predictable. They can also create fast paths for low-risk use cases and clear escalation for high-risk ones, so teams do not waste time guessing what level of review is needed. Over time, these program improvements make reviews faster and more consistent, which benefits builders and governance alike. The second line becomes less of a checkpoint and more of a quality system, similar to how good safety practices enable faster operations in mature industries. This is one of the most important ways to challenge without blocking. Improve the process so safety is built into normal flow. As we close, the second-line mindset is best understood as constructive tension that protects the organization while enabling progress. The second line challenges by naming specific risks tied to plausible harm and by guiding decisions toward constraints and controls that match stakes. It validates by confirming that important claims about safety, data protection, monitoring, and accountability are credible enough for the intended use. It avoids blocking by asking decision-focused questions, engaging early, and using proportionality so oversight matches impact. It strengthens culture by communicating in plain language, supporting psychological safety, and creating predictable pathways that reduce the need for shadow behavior. Over time, it improves the program itself by building reusable controls, meaningful evidence standards, and learning loops that prevent recurrence. When you can think this way, you are not just learning terms for an exam. You are learning how responsible AI governance actually stays strong without becoming a barrier to getting good work done.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.